Minister, look, we're all glad that we're having these statements again today, and I sit on the Education Committee with Deputy Oireachtas and Deputy O'Leary, and I was listening to their own contributions, and I was listening to your opening statement in relation to, and we all acknowledge that we have a record number of SEN teachers, a record number of SNAs, record number of ASD classes, and all those big figures are great, but I think you made a point in your own opening remarks that, you know, numbers and statistics don't matter. The individuals without a school or an appropriate school place is what matters. And despite all those, you know, big figures and big investment, and I think it's about 2 billion at the moment in the current Department of Education budget, there are still obviously gaps and shortfall in accommodating many students. So we need to acknowledge that. There's just a couple of things I'd like to raise here, and if you could address a couple of them in your concluding remarks, I'd appreciate it. And I'm going to try and focus on a couple of areas. I'll start with ASD provision, or the lack of provision of ASD classes in certain areas. And I don't want to go on a geographical journey here where I'm going to embarrass schools individually publicly, but I might just identify a couple of cases across the country, and indeed my own county. And, you know, there's large suburbs on the west of Cork City where there's one ASD class at primary level, one ASD class at second level, coming to a large suburb, as I said, of about 25,000 people. And so you've got one ASD at primary, one ASD at second level, facilitating a population of about 25,000 people. Totally inadequate, totally imbalanced. You go out the road to other outlying villages of a couple of hundred people, and a primary school there might have 3 ASD classes, or 4 in some cases. So this imbalance needs to be addressed. The way that we've allowed this model develop, we speak about working in collaboration with schools rather than adopting an adversarial approach, but I think it's high time that we take schools and boards of management to task. And the greatest power that you have, as has been registered here earlier today, is the 37A powers. And I know that that's not, you know, the most convenient of ways to do things. We would like to do things a little bit quicker, and I understand that the process itself can take up to 2 years, which is not, you know, the most appropriate of avenues to do it. But I do believe that, you know, instigating that procedure where appropriate as quickly as possible is the surefire way of signalling to these schools that they need to get their act together. I do welcome in your opening remarks you referenced a number of new schools being established, and obviously we will be receiving one in Cork City, and just yesterday we had confirmation that a second site in Glanmire has now transferred from Cork City Council to the Department of Education, in the hope that it will be developed as a special school. And it is my hope that we can just get on now and appoint a consultant, tender and procure for that site and get that building built, as it will facilitate, you know, dozens of children in the wider East Cork and Cork City area that require a special school place. I'd just like to bring to your attention, Minister, and it's just something I became aware of recently. We have approximately 140 early intervention classes at primary school level across the country, and at preschool level, sorry. And I suppose the difficulty we have, you know, you have kids that are 2 and 3 years of age, and many of those kids, let's be honest about it, if they're depending on the public service to get a diagnosis, they're more likely not going to receive that until they're 5, 6, 7 years of age. And what we're finding is at the early intervention classes, the majority of kids that are lucky enough to get a diagnosis at that age are people that have the means to privately diagnose. And what you're finding is the majority of those early intervention classes are populated by children whose parents have means, or whose family have means, to help them get those short supply places. And as I said, there's only 143 of those, or 140 odd of those classes nationwide, and I think it's something we need to work with, particularly with the childcare settings that we have, whether we develop a pod system or some ASD equivalent, or expand the early intervention provision that's there. But we need to work on the diagnosis of students, if that's to work. One other thing I'd like to touch on is the summer provision programme. I spent 15 years as a teacher. It's never a programme that had a good uptake, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons which are well aired. But I am hearing again about this year's provision, and it's great that we have 40 million, the largest budget ever that's been assigned to that. But from what I'm hearing on the ground, about 80% of those students that could avail of this provision will most likely not. And again, I won't get into individual schools, but I'm looking at a school in Wicklow. I've been told by parents' groups that there's 99 pupils but only offering to 12, a school in Cavan, 183 students but will only offer a programme to the severe or profound classes, and this is mirrored right across the country. So while funding is welcome, I do believe that we need to expand the people that actually can deliver that programme. You know, not everybody has to be a teacher that delivers July provision or summer provision. I know that the scheme has been extended to trainee teachers that are registered with the Teaching Council, but why can't we consider other trainees, you know, in the health sector, in the childcare sector? Anybody, in my mind, in the care sector could, in theory, I think, deliver a meaningful summer provision, far in excess of the percentages that are likely to take it up this year. One other thing I'd like to flag is just what I believe is the requirement for legislation in ASD provision. And as I said earlier, I don't think it's high time that the government and the department take it on themselves, or the NCSE are empowered to designate where ASD classes would be required. Do a proper demographic breakdown of it, decide where they're most needed and target them there. And leaving it to, as I said, the discretion of schools is not something that I'm in favour of continuing. And just finally, you made one other remark in your opening statement in relation to, I think apart from Dublin, you've been told that sufficient places will be available, and that's great, and that's welcome, because in Cork at the moment we have about 12 children who are still awaiting a place, and many now are opting to take a mainstream place which their CNO has deemed as inappropriate, but for fear that they will not get anywhere else, they are now going back to mainstream, and many of whom have actually tried to exit mainstream and get into a special school. So while the problem might be more acute in Dublin, I firmly believe that there are other areas, and we have made suggestions to the department in how to resolve that, and would appreciate if you would follow it up. Gormagat.